Welcome everybody. Blessed are those that visit this channel and enjoy the content here.
Season 1 of the Overwatch League has been completed, and as is tradition in traditional sports like the NFL, like the NBA, there is a regular season MVP award, Most Valuable Player. And as is actually tradition in some of those sports, the votes and who made the votes are actually released. It's a transparency component. And so in this particular case, as in some of those awards where it's oftentimes media members getting votes, in this particular case, it's a mixture of media members for the Overwatch League selected by Blizzard, notably missing many endemic media members, media members, some more in the games journalism side of things rather than the esports games journalism side of things, but we'll get into that. There are some coaches from the league, so coaches actually get to themselves vote the MVP, and talent, on-camera people for like Korean broadcast, Chinese broadcast, English broadcast. Now, I was excited to see the transparency here, to see who was voting and how did they vote, because there were a few different people you could have gone with here as to who the MVP was. I mean, most people were arguing between it's got to probably be Jonax, a heavy favourite from the NYXL, their amazing Zenyatta player. You had someone like Carpe, who really transformed the Fusion and was a hard carry throughout many of the splits. You had someone like Fisher, who transferred from Spitfire, where he was benched, and then helped the Gladiators become one of the best teams in the league. You obviously had the LA Gladiators, LA Valiant at one point in time, go to the very top of the league. So someone from their team perhaps could be considered. You had Philadelphia Fusion, as I said, with Carpe. Let's see, you had Spitfire, who obviously won a stage. We also know what they did in the playoffs, but that doesn't count here. So there was a few different directions you can go in. And I'll definitely say this is a subjective voting process. You're deciding yourself, what does most valuable player mean? And then even then, once you've decided what the criteria is, you're actually looking at the teams and figuring out who was the most valuable in each team, and then how did they stack up, and does being in first place of your team mean more than being maybe a better player but in fourth place overall in the standings, and does winning a stage mean something if your team fell off in stage 3, or does having a team that was consistently excellent throughout the stages boost you over the other guy, mean your performance was better? Should we only look at individual performance? Should we consider team rating? Despite all of this, though, even within the reasonable bounds of I have a subjective opinion and I just happen to think, for example, something that's a little bit wacky, like Kareev was the best player in the Overwatch League. Forget all those names Thorin said earlier. Or you know what? I actually think Pine, who, yes, was just being substituted a lot of the time. Actually, I think he was so insane when he was substituted. For some reason, he deserves to be an MVP vote. Now, as is often the case in, for example, NBA voting, another factor was, rather than just vote for first place, to make sure there's not some sort of a tie and then have to use a tiebreaker, what you actually do is you vote for your top 3 candidates, and then they get assigned points accordingly, and then basically it's overall who has the most points who actually gets the MVP award. So in theory, you could be the player who didn't actually get the most first place points, which happened in NBA history before, and win the MVP still. Because if you were first, second, or third enough times that you got most points, the logic is that, okay, this guy over here didn't think you were first place, but he still acknowledged you were very good. And so the average should mean you were actually the best. Now, you can certainly debate that format, but I think there's some merit to it, as long as people vote in good faith and genuinely vote the people they think were the most valuable players. Now, one of the things over the years in media, and this is going to be a very important point as I now dive into the voters and who they voted for, as far as MVP goes, has been this discussion of what is the most valuable part being, though. Now, a very simplistic reading of that would mean most valuable player, as in the most valuable player, as in they were the player who was just the best player in the league, like the best performing player over the regular season of this league. So many people would just say the best player. He's the MVP. Okay, that's a traditionalist, purist view to take. In more modern day media narratives, people have tended to switch more towards most valuable player, and then they take the logic of value typically to mean something like best player on a team that did very well, and the fact that they did very well means that his value must have been great, and on the team he was the most valuable of those players, and that's how they then determine it. Now, beyond that, you could say in some sports some people still cast votes for most valuable and they go off some other factor like, oh, he brought more to the team, like added some element they didn't have. That already starts to get kind of questionable. But you're going to see from some of the votes we're going to talk about when we look in the document here, there are some ridiculous votes, some really egregious, I quite frankly think disgraceful votes. And I think some of these people, as a result of how they voted, and especially some of the context of who they are and how they voted, some which is available, you're going to see that some of these people, quite frankly, whether they're entitled to their opinion or not, should probably be removed from future voting. And I hope Blizzard will take a look at how this was done, consider these points, and clean up this Overwatch League voting, because this MVP voting is really quite disgraceful in certain areas. A number of people, many people, voted in good faith, seemingly took the concept of best player or best player on a top team, ran with that, and therefore many of the votes are reasonable, and I think overall the results are going to be reasonable. But you're going to see some of the outliers are nuts. And so let's go ahead and jump into this document and have a look at the people who vote, because again, we can see them, we can see who they are, and we can look up who they are. So we're going to start here at the top, and I'm going to start off by talking about one of the most egregious ones. So even though some of the media people, I actually think, did some of the most ridiculous votes, and then when you look at who the media people are, it's like, why the fuck are they even voting? But the first place I have to start with is the people in this voting list I give the most credibility to know about the game, and in theory to have expert insight that nobody watching the game can have, are the coaches. So I want to trust these coaches to genuinely vote for who they thought the three best players or three most valuable players on top teams were in the league. And what you're going to find out is many of the coaches voted for their own players to be the MVP, sometimes ridiculously so. And some of these examples we're going to give suggest that it was not in good faith, and they either trolled the voting awards, in which case get them the fuck out of these awards, or even worse, they are so delusional, they really think all their players were the best, and they think it's reasonable that MVP should have three players from their team, even though MVP reasonably, if one of them's the most valuable, well, surely at least another player from another team is the next most valuable, not number two guy on your team. So let's start out with the coaches and team reps who, quite frankly, had some ridiculous voting. So Ty Wrong, the head coach of the Houston Outlaws, a team that for the first couple of stages was looking pretty good. By the end, they dropped off heavily. They weren't a team that was in contention to win the Overwatch League by the time we'd finished the Overwatch League. This is an individual who voted for Muma, first place, one of his players, Jake, second place, one of his players, Cool Matt, third place, one of his players. So he voted with his MVP votes for all of his own players, 1, 2, and 3. Now, of those players, there was times in the league, the first few stages especially, where Muma was very good, probably the best tank at certain points in time. So that's not even that crazy a vote. Bit dodgy to put in first place. He definitely dropped off towards the latter stages. Houston Outlaws as a team dropped off towards the latter stages. Now, Jake, I do not know anyone who would actually pick Jake in the league. In fact, I do not think anyone else in the entire 54 voters, because obviously one of them is this guy, voted for Jake. So everyone else in the entire league said, even given 3 votes, we don't think Jake was. But he has him as his second one. So that already is pretty egregious. I mean, putting Muma there, probably not deserved. But okay, there's a vague argument for it. Now he's putting Jake there, seemingly because it's his player. And to put Cool Matt there is actually disgusting. I know we're talking about subjectivity, but subjectivity doesn't just mean, well, because there could be a lot of interpretations, that like every interpretation is right or should be treated as right or treated as equal and of equal value. You must decide your criteria and construct a structural hierarchy based on merit, value, and that criteria. There is no rationale as to how Cool Matt, a player who I think most people would even debate whether he was the third best player in the Outlaws, never mind in the Overwatch League, should be considered the third best, most valuable player in the Overwatch League. So Tyrone, you done fucked up there, son. You're a joke. Right, now let's move on. So Ho-Chul Lee, technically you would say it's in Korean, Lee Ho-Chul, Hokyuri is a coach for the Seoul Dynasty. And what do you know? Hokyuri has voted for number 1, Fletter, his player. Number 2, Jonak. Number 3, Gesture. Now, first of all, Fletter is Hokyuri's own player. The Seoul Dynasty never particularly had any elite performance in any of the 4 stages and ended up being very underwhelming. So for him to vote his own player most valuable is already very questionable, especially because who else in the league's voting for his player, right? Only one other person in the entire league voted for Fletter as any first, second or third MVP candidate, and that was someone called Ashley O, who you're going to see later on had her own pretty ridiculous violations of MVP voting. So pretty much the entire league, all the other coaches, all the talent didn't agree that Fletter was one. Sure, Fletter was a very skilled player. In stage 1, maybe he had times where he looked like an MVP. The other stages, he was even being benched by the Seoul Dynasty coaches at times. He wasn't looking anything like an MVP candidate. And this again looks just like bias. Now, when you add in Koreans actually tend to be quite nationalistic, this is actually quite worrying because he's not only voting for a Korean, but he's voting for a Korean who doesn't really deserve to be there, and it's his own player. Fair play to him. At least he voted for Jonak and Gesture as second and third. Then again, I'd love to know the rationale as to how he can acknowledge Jonak and Gesture are amazing players. By the way, 2 players who should be candidates, Gesture of the Spitfire and Jonak of the NYXL, players who arguably performed in every single stage at their role as one of the best. But how can he acknowledge they're some of the best and then still vote Fletter ahead of them? Seems like bias to me and quite disappointing to see him do that. If he just didn't vote for Fletter and voted someone else here, Carpe, whoever, I'd say fair enough. In fact, I'd respect him for not voting for his own players. Then we go down to Byung-chul Moon, aka Moon. Again, Korean way of saying it, Moon Byung-chul. He is the Los Angeles Valiant coach. His votes were for number 1, Space, his own player. Number 2, Kareev, his own player. Number 3, Fate, his own player. Now, again, this is someone who's voted for all 3 of his own players. Now, the LA Valiant, by the last couple of stages, were a pretty good team, especially in stage 4, obviously, and they were a playoff team. So fair enough, I could see him picking one of his players again, but the idea that all 3 of his players are the most valuable, second most valuable, third most valuable, is a joke inherently with any criteria of how you would consider most valuable player. Even if you acknowledge one of his players was the MVP, he is disrespecting the entire rest of the league and not voting, I would say, in good faith. Then you've got to consider, let's look at the rest of the league and see how they agreed with his votes. So you know what? Space, his number 1 vote, fair enough, got 7 votes out of the 55 voters. Okay, so some other people agree with him. So that's, as I said, not necessarily that terrible. Space was a very good player in his team in the latter couple of stages. Admittedly, Space didn't play the first couple of stages, had very low playing time, and therefore probably shouldn't have been considered. That's another factor here. A number of people voted for individuals who had way less playing time because they didn't play all the stages. That seems bizarre they could be the MVP, especially then when they're not on winning teams. Then you got to look at Kareev. Kareev got 3 total votes, including his own coaches. So Space got 6, including 7, including his coaches. Fate got 3, including his coaches. So 2 people voted for Fate or Kareev, except for his coach. So that already suggests there's some fuckery here. What is Moon thinking? Does he not care about the integrity of this particular award? Is it because his team didn't win and he didn't do that great that he's just now trolling the awards? Get this guy the fuck out of here. Now, I will say, people like Huck of the Boston Uprising, Changoon, Pavane of NYXL, Kirby of the Philadelphia Fusion. These individuals also voted for players from their team. But actually, all of these individuals only voted for a player from their team who was a legitimate candidate. And so fair play, I will pass over them. Now, I will say, I think that the way the coaches have abused their position to vote for their own players is a disgrace. I think an obvious change Blizzard should change and should have already had in the first place as a preliminary precaution was to say coaches can only vote for players not from their teams. I still think you would have seen bias. I think as a result, maybe the Spitfire coach would have voted for Fisher, who used to be on his team. Maybe someone would have voted for a player who used to be on a different team, who used to be on his team but transferred. This might have happened. There still might have been abuses, but it would have limited stupid throw away all 3 from your own team votes like this. You know what though? One of the reasons why this matters is because, as I said, there have been times in history where stupid first place votes or too many third place votes to people who don't really deserve it have cost real sports athletes the MVP award. Now, let's go forwards I said the coaches, because of their status, were the most egregious. But in terms of, as an objective view, the real most egregious votes were by some of the media members and people who voted for players who had no business even being nominated. There wasn't that, I could make a case, but did he do it? No, these players had no business. So the first one we're going to talk about here is the player Geguri. And this was a flex off-tank player. She's a woman from South Korea, and she played for the Shanghai Dragons. Now, first of all, the Shanghai Dragons lost every single game in the Overwatch League. They went 0-40. So to make a case she was the MVP of the league, you would need some utterly once-in-a-universe type scenario where like Michael Jordan somehow is on the worst team and even he can't get you one win in the entire league. Doesn't even seem plausible, right? Then you've got to add in, I actually went out there and privately, so I'm not going to say who these people are, I quizzed what I consider some of the most intelligent and analytical and knowledgeable people about the Overwatch League who watch the Overwatch League heavily. And I did it across different areas like journalists, commentators, people within teams. And I tried to make it a cross section of the kinds of people who got to vote in this awards. And all I asked them was 3 questions. I asked them, how many people do you think should have been voted ahead of Geguri for the season MVP? Now, when I asked this, one of the people told me if there are 140 players in the Overwatch League, then she is likely around the middle of the pack. So we're talking like 70 to 80th most worthy MVP candidate, or under that by a little bit. Another person said 20 to 30 players ahead of her. So already he's saying, again, not even vaguely a top 3 candidate. My third individual said he would have 60 to 70 people, so he's kind of agreeing with the first one. And the fourth person said, he said it removing players who hadn't played much, that reduced it to 126 players. And so he considered that there should be at least 35 players ahead of Geguri. So the most charitable person said 20 players ahead of Geguri. And by the way, the key thing is here, they know their names aren't going to be put forward, so they can honestly tell me who they actually think, because they don't have any possibility of reprisals for speaking out against the narrative that this is a woman who's being voted for MVP. So with all that said, second question, how many people at her role were more deserving? So forget even just players. This is all MVP goes off players. What about just at her role, flex off tank? So again, one of them said she was slightly to below middling in the pack of all the players just at her role. So she's not even the best at her role, he's saying. Then another person said that he thought that between 9 and 11 players should be ahead of her. So again, massive amount of players just at her role more worthy of MVP. The third guy said that he thought she was only better than something like 7 players at her role, and 2 of those, one of them didn't play and one of them played like 5 games or something. So again, nowhere near the top of her role. And the last guy said that if there were 20 off tanks in the Overwatch League, including the guy who didn't play, then she was better than 3. So he's saying that of the 19, that she's only better than 3 out of 19. 16 players ahead of her at her role alone. You're seeing here, she's not only, in terms of overall players, not a candidate at her role, not even a candidate for most valuable at her role. So then the last question I asked was she even the clear-cut best player on her team? The team that lost every single game. I added that last bit of lost every single game. Now, the first guy said he thought Dia and Ado were better players in her team. Another guy said Dia and Ado were better players in her team. The third guy just said, no, it wasn't at all clear she was even the best in her team. And the fourth guy said he thought Ado was better, and you could maybe say Dia was better. So the consensus was Ado was better even from the Shanghai Dragons. By the way, nobody of the 55 voters voted for Ado in either first, second, or third. He got 0 votes whatsoever. So now that we've established that by a reasonable metric of experts and meritocracy, There's no universe in which Geguri should be being voted for MVP in first, second, or third. Now let's look who voted for Geguri as MVP, and you'll see the ideological poisoning of this MVP voting in this particular case. So let's go and have a look, shall we? So one of the first people who voted for this person was Nicole Carpenter, who was representing .esports, so a media website. I actually used to write for this website. And her votes went as follows. First place, Jonak. Absolutely fine. I actually would have voted Jonak first place. Second place, Fisher. Also my second place vote, actually. Not that it's relevant, just telling you I would agree with these. Third place vote, Geguri. Again, I've established there's no universe she should be possibly getting a vote. So then let's ask ourselves, why did Nicole Carpenter vote for Geguri as a top 3 MVP candidate? Now, normally, I wouldn't be able to know, right, unless she were to tell me herself. But if you went on her Twitter, she actually outright said. So let's go on to her Twitter here. And on her Twitter, she says on the 12th of July, after the voting was done, someone reached out to ask why I voted for Geguri for Overwatch League MVP. I was one of 3 votes for her from the expert voters. And I figured I'd explain why. Cool. More tweets. So she says here, MVP goes beyond gameplay for me. Pause right there. If this person's about to say they mean like, captaincy or like some sort of shot calling element that you can't see in game, fair enough. I could understand that because oftentimes like point guards in the NBA might get the award. Quarterbacks because of how they control the game, not necessarily just raw stats. Okay, that would make sense. But what does she mean beyond gameplay? Geguri did a lot for the league and her team beyond her presence in game. Where's she going with this? Number 1, her place as the first woman in the Overwatch League is worth commending. But why? This isn't a commendation award. This isn't like a favourite player in the league award. This isn't like sportsmanship award. This isn't like best representative of the Overwatch League. This isn't some sort of award for like, ambassador for the Overwatch League. This is an award for most valuable player. Player. Not most valuable. Who would we commend the most who happens to be a player? This is most valuable player. They were the most valuable as a player in the league. This person, their main first reason they cite for voting for Geguri is that she is a woman. It is her sex that is the reason that she has been voted as an MVP. Now, that is ideological poisoning of the integrity of this award. Second reason, she garnered a huge fan base surrounding the league's worst team. Now, there's no real evidence that that's correct. First of all, Shanghai Dragons had a decent fan base because they're the Chinese team, a massive viewing country and esports country. There's no evidence, I've never seen an article that showed some sort of large-scale survey or data suggests she brought a massive amount of fan base, which, by the way, should be possible to gain because she didn't start in the Overwatch League. She joined later. There's another reason, by the way, why she probably shouldn't be an MVP candidate, even beyond her team losing every game, her not being the best in the role, not even being the best on her team. Let's go and look at her playing time. So her playing time, she played 16, I'm going to assume this is 16 hours, 42 minutes and 14 seconds. Now, that's only 16 hours, and yet you go over here, Jonak, my main candidate, 41. Carpe, another candidate, 35. Gesture, 36. Even Fisher, who was benched at times and didn't play all the stages, 29 hours. He has 13 hours more. Profit, 35 hours. Striker, 38 hours. Geguri, 16. So she played on the worst team, wasn't the best at her role, wasn't the best on her team, and played, in some cases, 20 hours less in the league, winning no games. She would have to be the most exceptional player in the history of any team sport to then be a candidate for most valuable player. And this person didn't even vote for them on the basis of being a player, just on the basis of she's a woman and I like to support that. And she got a lot of fans for her team. What does that have to do with it? It's not a popularity contest, and it's not a contest about, are you a woman and let's commend that? Is your sex different from everyone else's? Well, then here's an MVP vote. Essentially, a diversity vote. Essentially, a vote based on sexism, quite frankly. I mean, there's a third vote here didn't go to a man because a woman was in the league and this person wanted to commend a woman for playing in the league. Now let's look at some of the other tweets that follow this up. So then this one says, I know Gigori has said she doesn't want to be known as a female player in the Overwatch League. Presumably she wants to be just known as a player. Congrats to Gigori, what a great attitude. But her presence really touched a lot of Overwatch fans who haven't felt represented in the esport, and that's really valuable. That sounds like a personal opinion right there. That sounds like a personal anecdote. What evidence is there to back this up again? This is someone voting seemingly on feelings and sexism, and ideological extremism of, she's a woman, okay, I'm voting for her, and she got a lot of fans, I'm going to vote for her. Nothing to do with her being a player or in-game. Someone like this, oh, but what's that? Third tweet in. So we're getting her fourth reason here. Also, she's really good. No, actually, she isn't really good. I've just established that. All the other voters in the league, except for two people who we're about to get to soon, also don't think she's really good. Or even, no, not even top 3. And all my experts say not even the best player on her team. Then she says, anyway, I had 3 votes, which were Jonak, Fisher, awkward, don't know why that's awkward, and Gigori. So I assume she means awkward because he got taken out of the team at the end of the league. I mean, still played more hours, like 13 more hours than Gigori, of course. So then my boy Yiska, who I do more show with, watched the Overture, came in and asked her, he said, I think that would make her an excellent recipient of the Dennis Hawelka Award. Obviously, the tragically passed Internet Hulk, who I believe his award's some sort of an ambassador award. So again, this would be an ideal award for someone like this if you indeed thought just being a woman meant you should get the award. And he says, in my opinion, the MVP trophy vote should be reserved for those closest to excellence. Unfortunately, I feel like your vote and the other two make her the anti-hero in that pursuit. Nicole responds, I will say that I did vote Jonak and Fisher ahead of Gigori because I knew my interpretation of value would be different than others, but I stand by her value as a player in the league. And I agree, she would be an excellent, just a typo there, choice for the DH award too. Now, let's address this. So she essentially initially acknowledges that her voting's kind of fucked up her criteria by saying that's why she also voted for Jonak and Fisher. So then why are you doing one set of voting for one set and the other just for yourself and your own unique criteria? Vote for your own criteria through all of it. I mean, they've given you the vote. It's your choice how you use it, right? If you do it in a fucked up manner, you might get called out, and I hope you get removed from voting and never get to vote in the Overwatch League again, quite frankly, because you have abused your vote for ideological reasons. So the idea you'd sort of acknowledge, well, that's kind of fucked up, so I better vote for the good players, but I'll give her the third vote anyway. And then also, implication here being like, well, it's not that big a deal, right? Does it matter? Yes, it does matter, actually. That could have decided someone's MVP award overall. So you might ask yourself, overall, anything else to say about Nicole Carpenter and Gigori? I thought to myself, you know what, let's go look up. Does Nicole Carpenter have a lot to say about Gigori normally, perhaps over the season? So I went to her Twitter and I did a Twitter search for the word Gigori. And what do you know? So ignoring when there's an article that's in the headline. So that's going to be, let's have a look. That's going to be a few times. Let's have a look. I've seen 3, 4... Okay, so I've seen 4 times that it was the article header, so she didn't say it herself there. So I'll remove 4. There are going to be 33 minus 4. So there are 29 times that Nicole Carpenter has tweeted about Gigori across the season and referencing her. So here's the most recent. She did an article saying about how Gigori's really important, and so she asked the commissioner Nate Nancer about that. Then she did an article in February. Gigori will become the first woman in the league. Really excited for her debut. Then she did an article, same article from before. She's responding again. Then earlier on, she's responding to those tweets that we saw before. Then when you go further back, she's tweeting at Gigori on May 31st saying, hi Gigori, I love you too. Then she's tweeting at Gigori on May 31st. Gigori sounds like she's obsessed with Gigori for ideological reasons because she's a woman, and clearly it's one of her favourite players who she's a fan of. These don't seem like good reasons to be allowing someone to vote for this player as MVP. Then you go down here, she talks on May 16th about how Gigori's going to be able to play some Zarya, especially with Brigitte potentially in the meta. She's excited for that. She has an article here. She talks about Gigori is extremely special. I mean, she's a woman. In that context, she's extremely special in the context of the rest of the league. I agree. But no, beyond that, as a player, she definitely isn't extremely special. Some would even say she was picked up cynically as some kind of a marketing move for a team that was losing every game. Then you go down here, she talks about how her dog is supporting Gigori. She goes down to a tweet here. I assume this is Gigori's birthday, so she says Gigori, 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 Gigori 5 times and a birthday thing. Then she goes down here. Gigori's making her Overwatch League debut in a few minutes. This is huge. Comes down here. Gigori is good. an article written about Grigori doing a clip on stream before she was even in the Overwatch League, I believe. And then down here, Grigori has accepted a offer in the league, and she hopes that it's going to be for the Overwatch League. So this is someone who's ideologically driven, voted for someone who shares her sex because she considers it important and thinks you're getting a lot of fans and you should be in there, isn't agreed with by anyone except 2 people in the league who you'll see are compromised in their own way in a second, and is a massive fan of this person, even is a fan who tweets at the person and seems obsessed with this particular person. I mean, just to put that in context here, let's go up here and let's, instead of Grigori, let's put in someone who was voted for quite a lot in the league, but wouldn't have been necessarily my top one, but might have been a top 3 one. Let's put in Carpe, shall we? Only three tweets ever about Carpe. One of them, she isn't even tweeting about the word Carpe. She didn't tweet about Carpe. She's saying, replying to someone in a thread that includes Carpe, that someone hasn't listened to the new Drake album. So this person is obsessed with Grigori and has voted for him for ideological reasons. Okay, right, let's go on from that, shall we? And let's ask ourselves, what are some other people who voted for Grigori? So we're going to go down now, and there was someone called, let's see, where is he? Here we go. Tamoor Hussain of GameSpot. I used to work for GameSpot when I was at On Gamers. He's voted for Jonak. Very good vote. Badosan, okay, bit of an outside left field one. But you know what? Badosan was pretty underrated. Did get pretty good towards the end. Kind of see it, I guess, in a way, if I'm really extending the circumstances. And finally, he gave Grigori a 3rd place vote as well. Now let's go look at Tamoor Hussain, shall we? Now, sadly, he doesn't tell us why he voted for her. He also voted for her in 3rd place again. But if we go to... Oh, he's done a tweet about Grigori as well, which is when Shanghai Dragons signed her, he says, Shanghai Dragons have signed Grigori, testing my allegiances to Spitfire. I started playing Zarya because of her. So he is a huge fan of Grigori. He even started playing the character most associated, the hero most associated with Grigori because of Grigori. He's tweeting about her joining the Overwatch League. He's really excited for it. And then he goes and votes for her for MVP. Remember, when you're voting for an extremely, that would be a once-in-a-lifetime person to be voted who lost every game, didn't even play all the season, only played 16 hours, wasn't even the best on their team, best at their role, you'd want some good reasons, right? No. The only time he's even mentioned Grigori, apparently he was so excellent throughout the whole split, he never bothered tweeting about her, is because she joined the league and he was a fan of hers from Zarya. So this person's already ideologically corrupt. We'd have to go ahead and assume. I'm just going to assume for that one. The 3rd person to vote for Grigori was Ch8 Yen, who is from NetEase iPlay, another media member. And they voted for 1st place, Jonak, great vote. 2nd place, Carpe, another very reasonable vote. 3rd place, Grigori. Now, what do we know about Ch8 Yen? So Ch8 Yen or whatever. Well, first of all, NetEase iPlay, NetEase, the company I'm assuming is above NetEase iPlay, is the company that owns the Shanghai Dragons Overwatch League slot. So again, this is biased voting. Also, this person is Chinese. Grigori is playing for a Chinese team. And finally, NetEase, the company, is also the Chinese operator for Overwatch. This is outrageous. What the fuck? This person should have their voting rights removed from the league. This is unacceptable, biased, ideological. Whereas the girl, Nicole Carpenter, voted for Grigori on the basis of sex and number of fans she brought to the league, and the fact that she had some nebulous reason that made her very valuable. This person's voting for Grigori, it appears, on the basis of nationality. Again, something you wouldn't want, and you're seeing the most extreme version of it now, because he's voting for someone on the basis of nationality who's in the worst team in the league, who hasn't won even one game. Remember, media narratives votes in the NFL and NBA at least go for teams that are among the best in the league, and then go with a narrative vote for just for the cool storyline. Outrageous. So, okay, after Grigori, there was another unacceptable vote that really should not have been there. And that was of another Shanghai Dragons player. That was Dia. And one person voted for Dia, someone I've referenced earlier, Ashley O. Ashley O works for Polygon Media. Polygon, therefore she is a media member. Polygon, much like GameSpot, another games journalism website that isn't even particularly known for true esports coverage. They just do stories. They tend to write a lot of articles about how everyone's sexist, racist, transphobic, or some sort of a bigot in the Overwatch League. That's been my noticeable observation about their coverage. They don't tend to analyse the game or break down who's good or have any knowledgeable or credible experts at the site. But for some reason they get a vote here. I assume because Blizzard wants to incentivise them to cover the league. A little bit of quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Yeah, I'll give you an MVP vote. You throw it away on some ideological bullshit. And Ashley Orr here is someone who votes for Dia. So Dia, okay, fair enough. Those experts I told you about, my anonymous experts, did actually say that Dia was the best player, along with Ado, on the Shanghai Dragons. Admittedly, one person didn't, but the other three did, three out of the four, so fair enough. Now, first of all, no other person in the entire league voted for Dia whatsoever, so no one else in the league agrees with this person. Even the NetEase Chinese guy didn't vote for Dia. Now, let's go and look up here, shall we? So Dia himself played 26 hours. You know what? That's not that terrible. For example, Fisher only played 29 hours. So in theory, the playing time doesn't entirely disqualify you, but it does compared to the other amazing players on winning teams who were the real MVP candidates. Obviously, it's still better, still many more hours, 7 more hours or so than Gaguri, and he's a better player than Gaguri and better in his team than Gaguri. So actually, better vote than Gaguri, but still an outrageous vote. Now, what do we know about Ashley Orr? Well, you know what? Here's one thing I was able to find out. I went and I searched. Did she say anything about Dia on Twitter? Oh, yes, that's it. I don't even know what date that is. She says, I'm dying. I'm sitting 5 rows from Dia and I want to tell him how good he's gotten and how I love and support his DPS for the Dragons. Then there's a picture of her just going nuts for some other players. So she's a fan of Dia. Therefore, she's voted for Dia as MVP. 3rd best, most valuable player in the Overwatch League. This is ideological compromisation of the voting process. Also, who is this person? They're the social media manager for Polygon. They're not even an expert about they're not even someone who's writing about the Overwatch League in depth or providing any kind of analytical basis. They run the Twitter account. What the fuck is this? So now let's go and look finally at one other person who was voted for, who wasn't like ideologically compromised. This wasn't that big a deal, but I thought I'd just address this one, which is that 4 different people voted for Agilities. So we're going to put this in here. Agilities, obviously of the LA Valiant, as MVP. Now, Muzzy of Overwatch League China broadcast voted for him as 1st place MVP. That's pretty egregious. I mean, most people would say the whole thing about the Valiant was they were a good solid team, but they didn't really have like a MVP candidate except maybe Space. That's about it. So he's voted for 1st place. Bit questionable. Then we have Danny, also of the Overwatch League China broadcast, voted for Agilities in 2nd place. Then we have Zhao Gui of the Overwatch League Chinese broadcast, voted for Agilities in 3rd place. And finally, we have Eero of Inven, who's a media member, Inven, a media site, long-time esports site, who's voted for Agilities as the 3rd place overall candidate. Now, if we go here, I don't have Agilities in my potential MVP. I would put Gaguri there for contrast. Agilities is someone, again, only voted for 4 times in the entire thing. I won't really call out those people. I think those are just bad votes. But I just thought I'd reference them because if I'm going to reference people doing it wrong, why not just cover all the bases, right? Now, voting is important. So let's jump back to the normal screen, shall we? Voting really matters here. There was a famous incident in 1990 where Magic Johnson won the MVP award despite not getting the most 1st place awards. And the guy who got the most 1st place awards came 2nd in the MVP voting, partly because 1st place awards got split amongst Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Charles Barkley. So Magic Johnson ended up winning just because people gave him more 2nd and 3rd place votes. Now, the reason he got more 2nd and 3rd place votes is because people sort of felt like, oh, well, if I give him as a 3rd one, he is a legendary player and, he needs to win the MVP. I don't believe he'd won the MVP before in the NBA. So he should get a vote, Obviously, it used to be like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for his team that was the MVP. And so he ended up, due to stupid voting, winning the MVP, even though he got 27 first place votes, while Charles Barkley, who had insane numbers and carried a worse team to a playoff performance, had 38 first place votes, 11 more first place votes, and yet he did not win the MVP. So we see that the second, third place votes do matter and are not just joke votes you can throw away for ideological or fangirl reasons or fanboy reasons. Likewise, there have been times in history where the whole voting panel actually thought, this is unanimous, this guy has to be the MVP. And so in the year 2000, Shaquille O'Neal of the Lakers would have been the unanimous MVP. He had 120 of 121 first place votes. Who gave away that other vote? A guy voted for Allen Iverson, who admittedly had a very good season. This wasn't even his MVP season, though. He won the next season. And I believe the guy who voted for him might have even been from Philadelphia, where Allen Iverson played. Likewise, in 2013, LeBron James, what a godlike player he was that season for the Miami Heat. He got 20 out of 121 votes. Who got the other vote? I believe a guy who was in New York voted for Carmelo Anthony of the New York Knicks, who weren't even a team with a very good record that year, just as the Sixers did not have close to the best record in 2000. He voted for him also for biased reasons, and just because Carmelo Anthony had had a good season, and the Knicks used to be terrible, and now they were like decent and were a playoff team, but weren't an elite level team. So even in terms of acknowledging true greatness, like who were the guys who got the unanimous vote, this has been screwed over by stupid ideological voting. So one last question before we go and finish this video. When I was talking about some of these people who absolutely, by what they've done and their reasoning, should be removed based on their behaviour. Some coaches who can't be trusted now, some media members who can't be trusted, some media members who never should have been voting in the first place, social media managers for a big game journalism website who, as far as we know, have no knowledge about Overwatch. We don't even know if they watch the Overwatch League religiously. Why, out of 55 people voting, are there so few endemic esports experts? If I had to list the top 10 people who are knowledgeable about the Overwatch League, I'd have some people in there like Yiska from Winston's Lab. Very knowledgeable guy, watches all the games, thinks about them a lot, knows some of the players, knows some of the coaches. I'd have Volamel, the best Overwatch League journalist. I know Blizzard's just aware he exists now because they don't seem to give a fuck about endemic journalists. We'll get to that in another video one day. Volamel, I'd have him in there. He is a fantastic journalist who watches all the games, studies the games, has a good understanding and grasp on the meta and the quality of the players. He is not on the voting panel. Maybe even Jane, someone who's coming more from the educational side, from the coaching side, but has done a lot of VOD reviews, who's made himself a community member, answers people's questions. Why is he not in there? Instead, we have people from Polygon, GameSpot, websites like these. We have people who have conflict of interest coming from ownership of spots in the league, like NetEase. They're getting to have votes. This is outrageous stuff. So quite frankly, even though I expect that the right person will win the award overall, and it will be one of the top 3 or 4 players overall, and then we can debate, oh, maybe it should have been this person. There were some egregious votes here, and I hope, for the sake of this award and its integrity, that Blizzard will do something about this. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.